Hi everyone, welcome to the Swift Arcade. I am your host, Jonathan Rasmussen. Last episode, we started building the Starbucks app and we set up the basic high-level architecture by adding some tab bars, giving each tab bar its own dedicated view controller, and we just set ourselves up for building the scaffolding of the application. In this episode, we're going to take a look at how to build this effect up here, something called a collapsible header. So notice as we scroll up and down here, that header expands and collapses. There's a nice alpha fade going on here for an animation effect, and it smoothly transitions and snaps in place as we drag up and down. And in this episode, you're going to learn how to do that. So come on in and let's take a look at how we can build a collapsible header. So if we look at the application and we just imagine what's going on here when this header collapses, you'll see a couple of things. One is the header collapsing is tied to the scroll. And two, as we drag, that header kind of snaps into place. So the way we're going to get this effect is we are going to hook ourselves into the scroll of whatever control this is that we're dragging up and down. For this example, we're just going to use a simple table view. We're going to hook into its scroll, and we're going to tie the scroll of the table view up to the header view that we're going to custom create just for this effect at the top. Now, the way we're going to make the header view snap up and down is we're going to modify one of its constraints. We're going to take a header view top constraint here. We're going to track that value as we drag up and down, and we're going to change it in an animation so it snaps up and down while also fading in and out. Now, the trick to doing that is knowing the height of our label or our view at the top here. We're going to track that. And then we're going to do some very simple math just to look for thresholds and track the direction to see whether or not we should snap or not. For example, if we are swiping down like this, notice how the header doesn't change. That's because we're swiping down, and in that case, we could ignore that drag down. But as we drag up, there's some threshold that we're going to pass here, something around 30 points. We're going to want to snap it up, and we're just going to keep track of that, apply some animations, and that's how we're going to get that nice snap up, snap down effect on this table view. So anyways, let's jump into the code now and see how this can be done. Okay, so to start off with, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. Just because I know we're going to start filling in these other tabs eventually, I'm going to go ahead and go into our project here, and I'm going to create a directory, a new group here called home. This is just going to be where we're going to put all of our home images and stuff like that. I can drag our home view controller into there. That looks good. I'm just going to drag this. Let's drag it down here to kind of put it near the bottom. If I can do that. There we go. And in here, let's now take a look and see what we need to do to build this header view here. So we're going to build a custom header view, and we can see that we've got a label and a button here. So note, this isn't a navigation bar we're working with. This is going to be a brand new view we're going to create, and we're just going to stick it at the top, and then we're going to figure out how to animate its constraints to make it go up and down. But let's start by just creating a brand new view and see if we can't lay this out. So let's go over to that new home directory we just created, and I'm going to go Command N. And we're going to create a new Swift file. This is going to be called our home header view. And let's just type this out and build it from scratch by going UI kit. This is going to be a class called home header view. This is going to be a UI view, just a plain old view. And in here, you can see we've got two things here. We've got a label and a button. So why don't we just go ahead and define those. I'm going to call it greeting. That is going to be our UI label. And our button, let's call it the inbox button. So let's go inbox button. That is going to be equal to a plain old UI button. There we go. And what we need to do whenever we create these views is we need to give them some kind of initializer. So let's just override the standard initializer here. Init frame, then we always call super on init, and in this case, because it is of type frame, I'm going to give it and use the frame initializer here when I call super, and I'm just going to pass in a frame of 0, meaning it has no height or width. And we need a required initializer. This is just something we have to do. If we were using storyboards, we would use this, but we're not. And then I have this pattern I like to do in here where when I create a new view, I basically break the creation and styling of the view into two parts. I create a function called style and another called layout. And I just kind of separate the functionality like that. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to go style here, and we're going to style the greeting and the inbox in there. And then I'm going to do my layout in here, and that's where we're going to do the auto layout and apply the constraints. I sometimes like to keep these even more separate by creating a separate extension for this work, just so I can keep the initialization clear up here. So I'm going to create an extension here called home header view. And I'm just going to go ahead and add those style and layout functions down here. Just like this, so I've got them nicely separated, and now we can go ahead and do our work. So the styling for our greeting label at the top here and our button is going to look like this. I'm just going to copy in the code and then we can walk through it. So basically we have our greeting label. First thing we always need to do when doing auto layout is set translate auto size remasking into constraints equal to false. I still forget to do this, and it leads to no pain when you're doing auto layout and things aren't working. So always remember to set that flag. But after that, I'm just going to go ahead and set some fonts up. I'm going to make this a large tile preferred font. I'm going to give it that nice greeting, good afternoon, Jonathan, with a sunshine emoji there. The way we get multiple lines for labels is we go number of lines is equal to 0, and then we set the way we'd like these lines to break by setting the line break mode. And in this case, I'm going to go by word wrapping. So that means it's going to take it by the word and wrap it to the next line. So that's how we're going to achieve that effect up here. And then the inbox, we are also going to set up for auto layout by setting that flag equal to false. Then we're just going to set some colors up. I'm going to use the label color. Black or white doesn't matter. It will depend on whether we're in dark mode or not. But I'm just going to use the label here for action normal on the title color. And then we'll set the title just to be inbox and also for normal here. Afterwards, we're going to add that little image there beside the inbox. But for now, this is good enough. So that's going to set up the styling of our controls. Next, we need to do the auto layout. So let's come down here now and go ahead and add these to our view and do the auto layout. So what do we do here? Well, we want to take our labels and our buttons and add them to the subview. So I'm just going to take my greeting and add it to the subview of our view. Remember, we're in a view here, so we don't need to go view dot add subview as if we were in a view controller. We're already in the view here, so we don't need that. That's one nice thing about working in views. So we can go add subview here, and then we can go add subview here with our inbox button. And now we do the auto layout. One way I like to do auto layout is I like to embed them in this little array of constraints. So I've got a little snippet for that. I come down here and I have something called activate constraints array. All it does is it prints out this little array of activation thing, which I can never seem to remember. So I just make this little shortcut. And all the constraints we type out in here now will be automatically activated. So we won't have to go is active equal true. So in here, let's think about how we want to lay this out. So our label at the top, we want to have it top, pin to the top, also have a leading and maybe give it a bit of spacing. So let's just go greeting dot top anchor, and we're going to add a constraint here. And look at all the options it gives us for a constraint here. Equal to system spacing below. Okay, I like that one here. I'm going to use it. So I'm just going to hit return. And what that's saying is add some system spacing, which for us is about 8 points below that top anchor. And go ahead and do that. So for us, our greeting top anchor constraint is going to be equal to the system spacing below the top anchor of the view we're already in. So we just get to go top anchor here. And the multiplier, how many points of 8 would you like? 1 being 8 point, 2 being 16 points. I'm just going to go 1. And that should stick it down there nicely. 8 points from the top. That's great. And then I just need a comma at the end. Next, let's go greeting dot leading anchor. And we're going to do another constraint here. This one we will do will be equal to system spacing after. we'll do the same thing, and this is going to be after the leading anchor, so we can go ahead and accept that. And I'll also give it 8 points, just coming from the left-hand side there, and let it hang off there nicely. Done. And then finally, to satisfy the constraints, we need to tell it how far should we come over. We could give it a width, but I don't really know the width of the label here right now. So I'm going to go with a trailing anchor. Now, just because of the language and the way the API works, I'm going to start with the views trailing anchor first. And when I go constrained here, it's going to say equal the system spacing after, and I want it to be after the greeting trailing anchor. So that's just one difference when you're using this nice equal the system spacing after. Sometimes you have to flip the orientation just to make the language work out. Equal the system spacing after trailing anchor, I can give it a multiplier of 1. If you don't like, having to remember to flip and not flip, which is basically on the trailing in the bottom, the other way we could have set this constraint up is we could have gone greeting dot trailing anchor constraint, and we don't have to use the system spacing after. We could have used equal to trailing like this and give it a constant of 8. That would be the equivalent to this one up here. Actually, I think it'd be -8 to take the direction into account. But I just sometimes like using this language, so I just remember when I have to flip the orientation and when I don't. Anyways, just a little bit of background on different APIs and how they work for AutoLayout. At that point, our label should be pinned to the top. We've got the width satisfied. It has an intrinsic size, so it'll know its height, and we've taken care of the label at that point. Next, let's move on to the inbox. So inbox button, where would we like you to go? Well, here you are just below the greeting, but we can also give you a leading constraint here and pin you to the bottom. See, this is the view, this white area here that we're building. So we can just go top, leading, bottom, and that should flush out and satisfy our in button constraints. So I'm just going to go top anchor. We're going to put you equal to the system spacing below our greeting. Bottom anchor. So we're going to pin it to the bottom anchor, and we'll give it a spacing of 2, or about 16 points. Whoops. And then here we will do the same thing. We'll go inbox dot leading anchor is equal to system spacing after the leading anchor of our view, and we'll give it a spacing of 2. Put the comma at the end, and then we'll go inbox button. We'll do the, so this one's the bottom. So this is one where I want to flip or invert the order because I always want to go bottom spacing after. So I'm going to go bottom anchor, constraint equal the system spacing below the inbox button bottom anchor. And we'll give it a multiplier of 1. Okay, so that should lay out our, let's just run this. That should lay out our greeting and button. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, nothing came up here because we aren't using this view yet. So now that we've laid out this great home header view, let's go ahead and use that. So to use it, let's go back to our home view controller. And at the very top here, let's just start setting this up. Let's create our header view. Whoops, and that is going to be our home header view that we just created. And let's go through a similar style and layout thing here. I'm going to go style, and then I'm going to go layout. And I'm going to go ahead and do this down here in an extension for my home view controller, just to keep those separate from the initialization at the top. Let's give it our function of style. And then let's give it our function of layout. And in here now, let's go ahead and set this up. So what I typically like to do in style is, of course, style any controls. Here we don't have a lot of styling to do because the home header view is already styled. So all I do in here really is I go header view. I remember to set that translate auto resizing mask equal to false because we're going to use auto layout. And then down here, we can go ahead and lay out this header view we just created at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and just add that constraint array. And what we also have to remember to do when we're doing the layout here is add it to the view. So let's go view.add subview, our header view. So that'll add the header view to our view controller's view, and now we can lay it out. And here we basically just want to position it near the top and also give it some leading space. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go header view, leading anchor, you're going to be equal to, now in this case, I'm going to just take the view and just pin it directly to the view controller's view. I'm not going to have any spacing. So here we can go header view, leading anchor, constraint, and this time I'm just looking for a pure equal to. I'm just going to pin it to the view's leading anchor, just because I want it to be completely flush there. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the trailing. So for the trailing, I'm going to go header view, trailing. I'm just going to pin you directly to the view's trailing area. So view.trailing. So that'll give us our width. I do want to pin it to the top also. So let's go header view dot top anchor. You're going to be pinned to the top. And the thing to remember, well, here we should be okay, but because we are in a view controller, I do want to pin it to something called the safe area layout guide. That'll make sure that whatever this header view is pinned to, it won't go to the very top or the super view way out here. iOS has this nice thing called a safe area layout guide that ensures that if you anchor yourself to it, you'll always be in the visible area on the screen. So here I'm going to go view.safe area layout guide. Its top anchor, which is just below the status bar here, so I can ensure that my view will be in the space. And yeah, I want that to be the top anchor there, and I think we should be okay. Okay, so we've got the top, the leading. If we run this now, let's go Command R and see what happens. Hey, not bad. There we've got our good afternoon, Jonathan. We've got our inbox button. There's our header view. We're still in a nav bar here. And we don't need that nav bar anymore, actually. This is something that was held over from the last video, just showing you what large preferred title sizes would look like. So we can actually get rid of that now. Let's go back to our app delegate. And in there, instead of calling this make navigation controller, which was doing this nice nav bar stuff for us, specifically setting the prefer large titles, we don't need to do that styling anymore. We can just make it a regular navigation controller and not even call that. So I'm just going to go Command R again after making that change in factory, and let's see what that does. Okay, that's closer. So now we've just got our title here, but we still have the navigation bar. For us with the home controller, what we actually don't need anymore is this navigation bar at the top. We're going to be driving functionality and flipping to different views by hitting buttons in our header view here. So we don't actually need the navigation bar or any navigation bar items. So what that means is we don't actually need to have our home view controller sit inside a nav bar like this. We just don't need it. So what we can do is we can actually get rid of the home controller navigation bar and just stick our home view controller and insert that directly into the tab bar controller. If we do that now, that will get rid of the navigation bar at the top. Now we'll have our header view completely flush right at the top there, and that's closer to the view that we actually want. Okay, so that's all well and good, but to get this cool collapsible header view going, we need something in the view controller there that we can scroll. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to bring in a table view, give it some nice thick rows, and that will give us something to scroll, to hook into, and then see how we can add that really cool collapsible header view effect. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to move a little bit faster here. I'm just going to copy in some code, but I'll still explain what's going on here. We're going to start by basically just adding a table view to our home view controller. So this is going to sit right below our header view here. Then we're going to need to give it some data. And the thing that's going to supply our table view with its data is I'm going to create an array of strings called tiles. So I'm going to pretend that these are the tiles that we're ultimately going to build later on when we're scrolling and doing all this other cool stuff. A tile is going to be one of these things. We're not building a real tile now. I'm just creating a data structure to hold a string that would be that tile. And we're going to give it some height. So we've got some data there. We can then go ahead and set up our table view. I'm going to add a method to view.load here. I'll call it set up table view. And we will go ahead and do all that good stuff. So let's start by bringing in our table view data sources and delegates. Let's start with the data source. So basically every table view, you need to supply it and tell it where its data is coming from. So I've got an extension down here on my home view controller where we basically say we will be the UI table view data source for this home controller. And here we're just going to, here's the method we defined up top, set up table view. Here we're basically going to set ourselves up as the data source and delegate for the table view. We'll register just a default UI table view cell. Every table view needs a cell, so we're going to register that with a cell ID. And this line here just gets rid of any extra footer or any extra rows we have at the end, that just whites them out. And then here, this is standard table view stuff. For every cell in our table view, we need to tell it what cell we need. So here we dequeue it with that same identifier that we registered it with. And we're just going to set some text on the cell. Every default table view cell has some text we can set. We're just going to set the title from our tiles here based on the row we're at. We can have a disclosure indicator if we want. We'll just return the cell here. Here's where we say how many rows in our section. Did select row at. We're not actually going to select any rows, so we don't really need this. And then we just need to also implement one more delegate here, something called the table view delegate. And this is basically going to tell us how, it's going to tell the table view how tall or how high that table view should be. So in our case, we're just going to go ahead and say that the height for row for each table view, let's make it really big, something like 300, and that'll give it a nice thick row. Now we're almost ready to make use of it. What we need to do now is auto layout our table view, just like anything else. So let's go back to our style and layout, and let's go ahead and now auto layout our table view. So here we're always going to remember we need to turn the constraints mask. You set that equal to false. So for our table view, we'll do that there in style. And then in layout, we'll go ahead and do all the good stuff we need to do when laying out a control with auto layout. Let's remember to add it to the subview. So this will be our table view here. We'll add it to the subview. And for this table view, we're just going to pin it to the top, leading, trailing, bottom edges of our view, and we'll hang it just beneath the table view's bottom anchor. So with these four constraints here, we're basically saying table view, I'd like you to go to the top here, just pin beneath the header view bottom anchor, then go leading, then go trailing, and then go bottom. Bottom also has that same safe area layout guide. We'll just pin it down there. And that should put our table view directly below our header here. Let's go Command R and see what happens. And voila, we have something here we can scroll. Fantastic, that's great. That's exactly what we want. I'm just going to add one more line here to help us see our header view and separate it from the table. I'm going to give our header view just a little bit of color. I'm going to give it a pink background. So now when we run it, we should clearly see our header view delineated and separated from our table view, and that'll make working with the collapsibleness easier. All right, there we go. Now we're ready for the fun stuff. Now we're ready to figure out how to make this collapse. Okay, so let's just quickly go over again how we're going to solve this problem. The key to making this collapsible is we need to tie into the scroll view here. So we're going to call into a callback that every scroll view gives us, and a table view is just a scroll view. That's why we're able to do that with a table view. There's a callback in there called scroll view did scroll That's going to give us the Y position of this scroll as we scroll up and down. So we can grab that. What we're going to do with that is we're going to apply that to a constraint. We're going to grab a constraint as a variable, header view top constraint, which sits at the top of our header, and we're going to apply that offset to it and help us to determine how high or whether to collapse that header view at the top. The way we're going to do that is we're going to calculate and note our label height here, this greetings thing. We'll see how high this thing is. And if we pass a certain threshold, we're going to snap it up. And as we drag down, we're going to bring it down. We're going to ignore bringing it down further. Notice how when I drag down here, we're not dragging it down anymore. That's going to be our swiping down. If our Y is less than 0, we're going to ignore it. But basically, that's the logic that we're going to apply in order to hook into this table view. All right, so let's go ahead and do this in code. First, let's just take a look and see how do we plug in or how do we hook into this scroll view did scroll. Well, we can go down here and just in my UI table view delegate, we can add the function scroll view did scroll. And basically, that's the hook back into our view controller from our table view. And in there, we can define a variable, let Y is equal to our scroll view. This is passed back to us via the callback. In there, there's a content offset of an X and a Y value. We can grab the Y value of that. And if we just print that out, let's just see what that does for us. And this is really the basis how a lot of animations and scroll view work in iOS with UIKit. You're basically tying into a scroll, you're bringing it up and down. And if I go Shift Command Y and bring up my console here, and I just give myself a little bit of space. As I scroll now here, you can see we get Y values telling us whether we're scrolling up by how much, or if we're scrolling down by how much. So the down we don't care about, we're going to ignore those negative values. But as we scroll up, as we get to about this 30 mark, that's where we're going to want to snap it into place above and make it animate. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go Shift Command Y to get rid of the debug there. Let's go ahead and set that up. And the way we're going to do that is we are going to track this top view header constraint. So let's go to the top of our view controller where we've defined our header view. And let's just add another variable right beneath it called header view top constraint of type NS layout constraint. And we're going to make that an optional. It's an optional because we won't have it when we instantiate the view controller. That's something else we're going to need to grab later. And we can do that if we go down to our layout section. What we need to do is we need to grab that top constraint as a variable when we create it. So instead of doing it here, here's where we're actually taking our header view and defining the top anchor and pinning to the safe layout guide. We're just going to pull that out and grab it as a variable here. So we don't actually need this anymore. We're going to grab it as a variable here. And then that variable, once we've got it, we can bring it in here. Because it's an optional, we can go .bang to unwrap it. And this will actually activate it in here. So just quickly reviewing what we've done here. All we've done is we've taken this constraint for the top anchor that used to pin our header view up here, and we've just grabbed it and instantiated it as a variable. We're still going to use it. We still want to activate it. That's why we still add this here. But now we can manipulate it and use it, which is exactly what we want to do later on down here. When we get into our scroll view, let's go ahead now and bring in our scroll view code and see what happens down there. So now instead of just printing the Y, I'm just going to bring in the full method and walk you through what we're actually going to do here. We've got our Y position for when we scroll. We know how that works. Let's just take a look at the math here and see what's going on. When we're swiping down, that negative value that we don't care about, we're going to track that and create a variable called swipe down. We just want to know what direction we're swiping, because if it is down, we don't really want to do anything. We're going to create another Boolean here called should snap. What this one's going to do is if we drag up more than 30, 30 is just an arbitrary value I just came about by experimenting. If we drag up more than 30, we want this to snap up. That's what that variable should snap is going to do. And then the only other piece of the puzzle that we need to make this work is we need to figure out what this label height is. So in our header view, we've got our greeting label. The way we can calculate the height or get that height at runtime is we can grab its frame height, and then also remember we've added a little bit of offset at the top here, 16 points. That was our multiplier of 2 when we did the layout here. That's the total height of this label and this offset. So if we just track that height, now we can do some interesting things when we know we've exceeded this threshold. And what we're going to do is we're going to animate the changing of this constraint. So basically, I've broken this into 2 parts. One is first we're going to change the alpha. That's what's going to make it fade in and out. You'll notice as we drag out here that "Good afternoon, Jonathan" fades in and out. That's what this animation is doing. This is a ternary operator, meaning if this is true, if we are swiping down, keep the alpha fully lit, leave it as 1, keep that label bright. But if we are not swiping down and we are in fact swiping up, and we know that's going to disappear, set that alpha equal to 0. That's what's going to fade it out. And we're doing this in a UIView animate with the duration of about 0.3 seconds. That's what's going on with that guy there. This is another form of animation here that I wanted to show you. This was the kind of older school way of doing it, UIView animate. It's a nice API. I still like it. But there's a newer way of doing an animation, and it's with these things called UIView property animator, running property animator. This is just another way of doing the same thing here. You give it a duration, you can give it a delay, you've got some more options. But here on this one, we are going to check whether or not we're snapping. So this is a ternary operator. You can tell by that question mark here. And the way this works is if this is true, if we're dragging up and we exceed that 30 threshold and we should snap, take our header views constant or the value associated with that header view and adjust it. In this case, subtract the label height and make it snap up. If that's not true, if we're not snapping, then just leave the top label view constraint as 0. Or if it was offset before, snap it back down to 0. And then this line here, view layout if needed, we'll call AutoLayout and we'll re-layout the view if needed. So that's what's going on in this line here. Now let's just see what happens if we run this. Let's go Command R. Let's go over to our view. Moment of truth. We drag up and it snaps. We drag down and it snaps. We drag up and it fades. We drag down and it fades. Very cool. So that's how we can get a collapsible header view by dragging up and down, being tied into the scroll view. Fantastic. Very cool. Before we wrap up, let's just do a couple more touch-ups. One is let's see if we can get this inbox to actually have a email sign beside it. So let's go back to our home header view, and down in the bottom there, I'm going to add one more extension. This is an extension on our header view. I'm just marking this up as a factory area. This is just where I'm creating a factory method called inbox button. Right now, what our inbox button is it's just a simple UI button. It's beautiful. I love it. It's just a simple button with a title of inbox. What we can actually do is use SF symbols and give it an envelope like we did before, kind of with these tab bars at the bottom. So basically we can come in here and get it ready for auto layout. We can do our UI symbol configuration thing, give it an image called envelope. This is the SF symbol for envelope here. And then we can just do some basic styling by setting the image on the button with this envelope. We can then give it a color. In this case, I've given it a secondary label color, scale, aspect, fit for the content mode for that image, just to make sure it sizes itself right. Then just like we did before, we can set the title of the inbox button, set its color to also be secondary label. And this bit down here, this is kind of neat. This is how you can adjust and position the image or the label with relative to each other. So in this case, the image, we want to have a little bit of spacing on the right of 16 here. And the content or the label on the inbox here. It's fine where it is. I'm not going to move it at all, but I just wanted you to see what that API would look like if you wanted to nudge that text around. So let's go ahead now and use this make inbox button. Instead of doing these lines here, we can just delete those, call make inbox button in style. And if we run this, we should now get a inbox with a nice little envelope beside it, a little bit closer to what we actually want in our final design. There we go. Inbox. Looks like it could have a little bit more spacing there. The reason why this still hasn't spaced itself out as much as I'd like is it's a little bit constrained. I need to make that button a little bit bigger and give it a little bit more breathing room. So what we can do is we can go back into where we did our auto layout for the in button and add one more constraint. This one is going to be something to do with the width. So we can go inbox button width. We can basically say make this button about 1/4 of the size of the width of the view. So the view goes all the way across the screen here, but by reserving about 1/4 of the width, that should give it the necessary breathing room to make it expand a little bit more. And then when we do that, those image edge insets should come out just a little bit more. And there we go. We got a little bit more space there. Next, there's some colors I'd like to apply. I'd like to give these tab bars down here a little bit of color. So I'm going to go back into factories, and we're going to use these more in the future, but the one we need right now is this light green. And I'm just going to drop in some extensions on color. We're going to give us some yellows, some browns, some greens, some nice Starbucks colors, which we're eventually going to use. This light green one, though, is the green for this home here on our tab bar. And the way we can set that is we can go into our app delegate, and in these two lines here, we can go tab bar controller.tab bar tint color. That's going to tint this to a light green. And then we can set the tab bar is translucent to be false. That will prevent the purple or whatever background color of the view is from shining through. So if we go ahead and run that now with a Command R, let's see if that changes our tint and makes that tab bar kind of a solid and not so translucent. And now when I tap, okay, nice. It does. It's solid. We've got our tinting, and we'll figure out how to make it actually do everything else perfect later on. We don't actually need this make navigation controller method anymore because we're not using any preferred titles, so we can get rid of that. And there we go. Okay, good stuff, everyone. I know that's a lot of work. These collapsible headers, they take some time. So just to review what we've got here now is we've got a nice architecture with a tab bar, navigation bars. Today we did the collapsible header, which is really cool. That's how we've got that sliding up and down. Come back next time and we'll figure out now how to start fleshing out these tiles on our home screen here. How do we design How do we design a tile system so that we can scroll up and down, drop in tiles, and do this in a nicely well architected way to give it that nice look and feel that the Starbucks app has. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Stick with me. We're going to keep going and doing some cool stuff here, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.